The gaming space is in a pretty weird spot right now with so many bad decisions happening so quickly, it's just leading to this avalanche of garbage. Like, I don't think Mr. Magoo could make as many horrible decisions as these video game executives have been recently. We just saw it with Escape from Tarkov doing their best Voltorb impression and using self-destruct on their entire company and game, by being overcome with greed and leading to the absolute destruction of their product that they had built up over the course of years and ruined the trust of the community. And then immediately after that, Sony decided to do something even stupider by activating the Orb of Confusion and trying to find a way to ruin one of the most successful games in recent memory with Helldivers 2. They went full-blown like Brain Offenheimer, now I am become death, destroyer of games, and made a greedy decision that nearly ruined Helldivers, and then they had to break out the ukulele for their public apology press tour here. It's like they got offended that someone did a worse job than them, so they found a way of one-upping it. And then from out of nowhere, sneaking in from the shadows, we have the dumb assholes at Xbox going, wait a minute guys, check this one out. And then made a clown of themselves, like fucking fools, publicly eating shit, making terrible decisions. It's like a Royal Rumble, where more and more AAA industry companies keep coming forward and make decisions that beg the community to throw pies and tomatoes at their faces. Yesterday they announced there'd be some closures coming to some studios under the Microsoft umbrella. Arcane Austin, Alpha Dog Studios, Tango Gameworks, and Roundhouse Games were banished to the Shadow Realm. And that means that Xbox has now closed more studios than it's released games this year. That is an embarrassing statistic. They are more likely to close a studio than they are to release a game at the moment. That's fucking shocking. Now, I really want to get into the weeds of this and roll around in the mud, but before I do that, I do want to thank today's sponsor, Current. Big thanks to Current for sponsoring this video. I think a lot of you are probably familiar with Current. We worked with them a lot in the past, and they have a lot of great products. The new one is an absolute game changer. It's called Paycheck Advance. When you start banking with Current, you can access up to $500 before payday once you qualify. Paycheck Advance is free, or you can instantly withdraw cash for a small fee. You can withdraw as many times as you need without additional fees, and there's no lines of credit and no credit checks. So stop waiting for payday. You can go ahead and get Current and get Paycheck Advance right now. So go to current.com/penguinz0, or you can download the app and set up a direct deposit and use my code penguinz0 and get $50. Terms apply. You can also click the link in the description below to get started so you can try Current and build your money future. current.com/penguinz0. Thanks again, Current, for sponsoring. By far, the biggest criticism that Xbox has faced over the last decade is their lack of games. In the Xbox 360 era, they were kings, pumping out some bangers, absolute timeless masterpieces. And these puppies were popping fresh out of the oven days or months after each other, which is unheard of in the current landscape of things. Crobcat has a great video on the golden era of the 360, and the iconic games that were coming out quickly. It was like they're playing on a fucking Minecraft private server where you couldn't stop hitting diamonds. Like, every block was diamonds back then. And now look at it. It's such a fall off. The Xbox exclusive release schedule looks more empty than that room Squidward went to be all alone. It's sad to see it in that state. They just don't make mini games anymore. They are by far the worst out of all the major players. And it's not even really close. They do still have some exclusives that come out, but it's very seldom. So, anyway, the fact that they're closing studios is a big, alarming red flag for a lot of gamers because they're just struggling, clearly struggling. Not just them, the whole industry is, but Xbox in particular just cannot get it together. When they do, by some miraculous divine intervention, release a game, an exclusive, they haven't been that good, like Redfall. Redfall became the joke of gaming last year. And speaking of Redfall, that gets to one of the studio closures, which is Arcane Austin, the studio responsible for that blemish, that absolute festering wound on the AAA gaming space. They shut down that studio because that game flopped so hard for them. They didn't even give them a second chance. And keep in mind, Arcane Austin didn't want to make the Redfall that we received. That was put upon them from everything I've seen. All of the evidence points to them working on that game because they were forced to. And that brings us to what has by far been the scariest studio closure, which was the shutdown of Tango Gameworks, which is the studio behind Hi-Fi Rush. Hi-Fi Rush is by far Xbox's most positively reviewed game in years. It was a darling. It was a game that everyone appreciated, everyone had nothing but praise for, and absolutely one of those games where people were like, Xbox might be back. Finally, a good game. Finally, an exclusive that's not dog shit. And then they shut down the studio that made it. It was reviewed tremendously. Everyone loved it. And they still shut the studio down. They took it behind the barn and put a bullet in its head. There's a quote in that article that says we couldn't be happier with it. Like, they were pleased with its performance. But I guess it just wasn't enough. And a lot of people are blaming Game Pass. Game Pass is a really good deal for gamers. I've said that since the very beginning, since the genesis of Game Pass. That shit slaps. It is crazy value. That'd make your fucking head spin. And I always said, I don't know how it's profitable for them. And I don't think it is. I actually am starting to get behind those tinfoil condom conspiracy theories that Game Pass is actually ruining some of the game studios because their games are getting put on Game Pass, thus people aren't paying full price for them or anything, and it's making their sales numbers look weaker because why would you pay full price for Hi-Fi Rush if you could just sign up for Game Pass and have access to it for free, basically, right? Like, it's one of those things that doesn't reflect great on the sales numbers of the games that are on there. And I really think that this is great proof of that. A lot of people played Hi-Fi Rush. This was a game that was being streamed out the wazoo from what I recall. Everyone was talking about it for a while. It was the hot button topic of conversations that Xbox has finally delivered something great for the first time in a long time. And now fast forward to today where they're shutting the studio down. So the performance, like, financially must not have been that great, which is surprising. So it's either because of Game Pass or because of how inflated the costs are for producing games in the modern age. This shit is gluttonous when it comes to eating money. This is something I've talked about over the last couple of years, but games are so expensive to make now, it takes years in certain cases to deliver a game. That is a long time to be paying for a game to be produced, and that's not even counting in the marketing budget and the amount of spending that goes into that. So it's not enough for a game to just be really good and sell pretty well. It needs to sell extraordinarily well or have some built-in lifeline monetization where you can continue to make money off it long term, so it's not relying on just the initial sale of the game. You bake in these monetization schemes that can continue to tap into people's piggy banks and milk their titties dry for their allowance as you give them these cosmetics and loot boxes or whatever you're putting in there. So that way you can try and make that money down the line and turn a profit. Because it is so hard to break even on games right now, you'd need to move millions in a lot of cases. To have a profitable game in the AAA space, you have to outsell the Bible, basically. It's not easy. And it's leading to so many problems in the industry, which is why they seem so desperate to find new greedy ways of monetizing it. It is in a terrible place, which is why indie games are flourishing. Indie games are picking up the slack and they're crushing it. Indie games right now are the best games on the market. Now, this Bloomberg article has more information here. This is from Jason Schreier and Dana Bass, who worked together to dig into the details of what's going on there. Executives felt stretched too thin trying to manage every team. The studios had just released games and needed to staff up to be able to start work on new ones, and more cuts will occur at an individual level with staff offered severance packages within Bethesda proper. As far as studio shutdowns go, Booty said that the company's studios had been spread too thin like peanut butter on bread, and that leaders across the division had felt understaffed. They decided to close these studios to free up resources elsewhere. Now, Booty is referring to Matt Booty, who's been in charge of Xbox Game Studio for a while, and his name is so fitting for this situation because this is just ass. This Booty can't stop shitting the bed at Xbox right now. And Mr. Booty goes on to add that Redfall's failures were not the reason as to why the studio was shut down, which is a whole load of horseradish. That is just a lie. He is just telling a fib right there. It was intimated with Arcane Austin, Tango Gameworks, and Alpha Dog all just having put games out that it was tied to timing more than results. Tango had just put out the critically acclaimed Hi-Fi Rush and Ghostwire Tokyo titles, Arcane Austin put out the aforementioned Redfall, and Alpha Dog had released Mighty Doom. Roundhouse had been working as a support studio and will be absorbed into ZeniMax Online to work on their projects instead of being closed. Which is still basically closing that studio in my opinion, but I guess not technically. But anyway, these closures come less than 6 months after Microsoft laid off 1,900 Activision, Blizzard, and Xbox employees, and just months after Sony closed some of its own game studios and laid off around 900 employees. So these layoffs are just happening at an alarming rate with all this turmoil in the gaming space. And then I saw this headline that popped up today from The Verge. Microsoft says it needs games like Hi-Fi Rush the day after killing its studio. So the goofball Matt Booty came forward wearing the dunce cap and said in a town hall discussion, "We need smaller games that give us prestige and awards." Brother, you are dancing on the grave of one of the studios that delivered just that. Hi-Fi Rush was a small game. It was critically acclaimed. Everyone loved it. It won awards. Like, it was exactly what you were describing. You just buried them 24 hours ago, and now in your post-mortem, post-nut clarity, you're scratching your chin. We need some smaller, less expensive titles that can be extremely good and really punch above their weight class, winning awards, being very prestigious. Let's try that approach. That's something we haven't tried before. I could be a pioneer, a trailblazer with this approach. Like, it's no fucking wonder Xbox is so disheveled and all over the place and can't get their act together. Matt Booty is suffering from amnesia. Like, how in the world could you make this statement after you just shut down the studio that did exactly what you described? AAA gaming is such a mess. It is a disaster, and I think it's only going to continue to get worse. There are rumors, of course, of more layoffs coming at Microsoft and more studio closures perhaps down the road. I wouldn't be surprised. I also do think we're going to see more on Sony's side with them having more layoffs and all that, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. It's just too unsustainable at the moment with these big budget AAA studios right now and the publishers behind them making awful decisions for them down the road. So, yeah, just wanted to talk about this a little bit. That's it. See ya.